Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.
Good afternoon. Welcome. You have joined us at Distill, a 360-degree view of life and sports. My name is Wendy Rosenthal. I almost forgot my name right there. And I want to welcome everybody today. I'm very, as always, excited to be here at our second or third home, the Universal Broadcasting Network. Each and every, well, not each and every Tuesday. I always say that. I'm just convinced it's going to be each and every Tuesday soon.
That's it.
Yeah, so many people clamoring to be on. Yeah.
Soon.
Every other Tuesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. And I am joined with the ever lovely, ever present, always ready to chat about something. My co-host, my partner, and my friend, Eira Schwitzer.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Yay, I'm excited about today.
Are you?
Yes.
I hear it could be slightly controversial.
It's going to be, well, I think so. I didn't want to talk about the whole thing on the way here as we're driving.
I know.
You
wanted to surprise me?
Yeah, just the last week alone, the number of conversations I had with people who were from both sides of the spectrum. People get animated about this topic. So this is going to be a good show.
If you are wondering what the topic of the show today is, I'm going to tell you who our guest is. I'm not going to introduce her quite yet, but we are very honored to have Olympic silver, should be gold medalist, Allison Wagner, to talk about an incredibly disturbing, annoying, and actually frightening to me topic about doping in sports, using performance enhancing drugs in competition. And it's so disturbing because when you start to dig underneath the surface about this whole topic, there's so many incredible bits of information that I bet you didn't know about. So I think this is going to be all at once educational, controversial, and exciting. And we are very excited to have Allison here. But before we start, we want to say a hello to our favorite producer, engineer, and security blanket, Jarvis Essex. How you doing? Scream a little louder. I can't hear you. I can't hear you, Jarvis.
I'm great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for being here as always. And we want to remind everybody that you can join the conversation and actually give us your opinions and ask questions. You know, it's not often that any of us get to talk with an Olympic champion, and I think this opportunity would be great. So if you have any questions, you can do one of three things. You can make your comments or questions on our Facebook pages. You can call in to UBN at 323-284-7826, or you can Skype in at UBN Guest 1. So we look forward to hearing your feedback. Before we get started, I wanted to just throw it over to Eira, because we always like to talk about a couple of the things that are going on in the sports world.
And this was a fun weekend.
Yes, it was.
Kentucky Derby going on. We were very excited about that.
I got to tell you, I was almost in tears. It stresses me out to watch horse racing. It really does.
Yeah.
Like, I feel for the horses,
Sure.
and on top of the fact that it was pouring rain,
Sure.
it just absolutely terrifies me.
Yeah.
So
And it's all that build up for just super quick race. It's over in an instant.
I know. Did you hear about the person who won like $1.2 million?
Yes.
Like off a $5 ticket? Because she picked
$18 ticket.
$18
Pick five races, $18. Yeah.
That's like
Man,
insane.
that's awesome.
So what do you want to talk about?
Well,
besides that?
Justify. I think it's pretty cool. I mean, you and I have been talking about this forever because, like you said, you're in pain watching these horses that we know are super young out there. And Justify was the first horse since, what was it, 1882?
Yeah, 100 plus years.
Yeah, to win the Derby, never having raced as a two-year-old. So it says a lot about really is it necessary to get these horses out there.
Well, I don't think it's, I don't think it's necessary. And B, I feel like if horse owners would take that step of allowing them to mature more, they'd actually see longevity and they'd have a better, longer career that might go beyond the 1 or 2 or three big races that everybody wants to win.
Right.
So
Right.
I was very, very happy to see that. I was
know.
very happy he won for that reason only. Because
it says a lot. It was a huge statement.
having been around the horse racing business a little bit myself, and quite honestly, I'm a fan, even though it pains me.
Yeah.
That part drives me nuts.
But how big of an impact do you think it'll really make?
Oh, these things I think always take time.
Yeah.
I think if one owner stands up and says, look, I can do it and proves it, you'll have others following suit. But, it's going to take time for sure.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's a step in the right
It's a shift
direction.
in consciousness, and it takes time to get there.
To
But
manifest.
It could happen if people want it, so we'll see. But now there's a good reason to why it can and should happen.
And by the way, Justify won hands down. It
Yes,
wasn't
it
even
wasn't
like
close.
neck and neck.
Wasn't
it
close
was
at all.
I don't know how many furlongs he was ahead, but he was.
Right.
It
He
was not
ahead.
small.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was a. I'm gonna win this thing. I
I have
am
a
the
point to
winner.
prove.
I have a point to prove.
For Wendy.
What else?
I have a
Yeah,
point
only
to
for
prove
me.
for Wendy.
It was me. He saw the tears in my eyes, and he knew. He knew.
Did you read over the weekend the article on Alexa Carrasquillo?
I didn't, but you're going to tell me about
I
it.
am, because I was fascinated. She's, just turned 12, barely turned 12 a few days ago, I think it is. But at age 11 was the youngest athlete to ever verbally commit to a university. And she committed to the Florida Gators. She was 11 when she verbally committed. And I'm thinking, it's 2 years older than Heloise.
Yeah.
How do you, at that age,
How
does a university want an athlete to commit so young? I mean, look, and they talk.
It's
briefly
not
to
like
the
they
parents.
can. It's not like they can redshirt them for 6 or 7 years.
Right.
Like
Right.
once you're in, you got to get into the system.
Yeah. And they talked briefly to the parents who said, we really encouraged her to consider all of her options. And she went and visited a number of different universities. But again, I'm thinking, even so, at 11, are you able to make that kind of a decision? Should you be making that kind of a decision at that age?
We're gonna hold that over just a little bit. I don't want to infringe on Allison's time, but
Yeah.
Allison was an athlete from the time she was quite young. She
Yeah.
won. She set a world record, I think, when she was 17 or 18 years old. She'll
Yep.
fill us in, but at the end of the day, it would be great to hear, because personally, I think that's way too much pressure for a kid who, she may be able to handle it, but so then she gets out of college when she's 15, and then what are you gonna do?
Well, she's not starting just yet, but she's
Oh, they're
committed.
committed till-
She's committed to when she's.
Oh, when she's
Yes.
Oh, I thought okay.
No, she's not going there now.
I thought that. See, I didn't read. I told you I didn't read the article.
But go ahead. Let's bring on Allison.
So what was that? Oh, but you know what? In a lot of ways, interesting, because it's kind of more along the model of, the Premiership, the football leagues in Europe, who bring on kids super early,
Right.
through their education, which is so.
Exactly.
It's along those lines.
Along those lines, kind of, but.
What's
there's
to
a whole lot
guarantee
more.
that in 5 years she's like gonna even be good, and B, want to go to school
Right.
at Florida?
Right.
That's a big risk.
It's a big risk.
We'll have to keep an eye on that story.
Anyhow.
I like it. Okay, and finally, before we bring Allison on, as always, there's a story behind my hat. I love hats, and therefore I wear one on every show, and I try and connect the hat that I'm wearing with our guest, kind of in, thanks to our guest for being here. And today, some days are harder than others. Today was slightly hard until I finally realized I had a hat that kind of looks silver. And even though, as you'll hear Allison's story, she should have taken the gold, this silver hat is for you, Allison. It's to connect us, and so hopefully it's coming off silver on camera. I don't know. I want to welcome, before we get started, everybody who is watching here and overseas. Thank you for tuning in. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Allison Wagner. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys. I like those pictures.
How are you doing today?
Good, thanks. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate it. Allison, before we kind of launch into the larger topic, can you just give us a few seconds, minutes on who you are and your very, very, amazing career that ended up with a lot of medals, some world records, and some advocacy beyond that, which is quite probably equal to your swimming career.
So somewhat like the young woman you just mentioned, I was an elite child athlete. I almost made an Olympic team at the age of 14. And from that point on, I devoted a lot of my time. I was still attending school, of course, but I trained for the 96 Atlanta Games. And along the way, set a world record and won 13 national titles and a couple world championship titles. And many of those races on the world stage I competed against women who were doping. So when I was watching the Rio Games on television, I wasn't there. I was just heartbroken to see so many people, especially women, in the same position that I was in. And quite frankly, infuriated that not enough has changed. And it wasn't like I didn't realize that not a lot has changed, but I didn't realize that so little has changed. And when I watched the Rio Games, I just decided, well, somebody would be willing to hear me tell my story. And I have opinions on this. And I really care a lot about anti-doping reform because it's totally realistic. It's possible. And there's no reason that it can't be at least slowly chipped away at as a problem.
I couldn't agree more. And I think I want to put a little bit of context around what happened to you in Atlanta. So your competitor, the young lady that won, Michelle Smith from Ireland, had competed previously in the World Championship, and she had never raced as fast, I think 20 seconds slower in her last major race. And she comes into this Olympic Games literally winning 3 gold medals, I believe, and a silver, if I'm correct. A bronze, sorry. And you always suspected that she had been doping because that kind of performance in swimming doesn't happen very often, if ever, that you would, increase your performance, your best performance by that much. And, but you were in a position where you won the silver and you took it home, and a couple of years later, after more testing, they discovered that she indeed had, what's the word I'm looking for? Not sullied, but tainted her urine sample and made it look like that she hadn't doped, but she had. That's kind of the background of the story. Ultimately, she was banned from swimming for 4 years. However, she got to keep all of her medals. That had to be incredibly infuriating to you.
Yeah. I mean, by the time the 96 Games happened, I had been competing against women who were doping on a fair number of occasions. And this is going to be perhaps a controversial statement, but by that point, it wasn't that difficult to spot athletes, especially women who were doping. I've told journalists this before, but, going into the locker room, seeing injection marks on athletes' rear ends, seeing, facial hair, deep voice, changes to their bodies, skeletal growth that were abnormal looking, and then their performance changed at the same time significantly. And in the case of Michelle Smith, her boyfriend was banned from sport for doping. He actually trained with the same trainer Ben Johnson used. So they were all connected, and it was like, yeah, this is happening. It was obvious, not just to me, but to many people. At the same time, I showed up to race, and it wasn't like I was new to racing against doping athletes. Swimming is a very technical sport, so I did my best, but did not beat the doping athlete in the race.
And, the doping issue goes back a lot farther than the 1996 Olympics. There was a great article that you sent us that actually cites Shirley Babashoff. Do I say her last name correctly? Yeah. Who I remember. I mean, I was young, but I do remember the whole thing happening with her. And what she got criticized was for speaking up and making a comment about the fact that it was very obvious that many of the women that she was competing against had physically changed.
Sure.
Right? Why at the time did you feel like you couldn't speak up, or did you want to and didn't feel like you had an outlet for it?
Oh, yeah, I definitely wanted to. I was warned by my national governing body to not say anything. I was warned by my coaches. I was threatened by both of those parties to not say anything. So I chose not to say anything. And what can I say? I'm making up for it now.
Well, and I didn't ask the question to judge you. I'm curious more about what the system is, or the situation is, that you had to face and the choices you had to make by not speaking up.
Right, more of the restrictions imposed upon the athletes by the governing bodies not to allow
there's
them
no
to speak
judgment.
up.
Yeah, there's no judgment on it. It just it shocks me that you would be put in that position, especially as a young person.
And I know you're not judging me. I was just trying to make a joke.
Yeah. Oh.
But yeah,
I'm a little slow on the uptake today. Sorry.
It wasn't that funny. No, I was encouraged and told not to say anything about my observations, and it was extremely frustrating, especially in the case of some of the Chinese athletes I raced against in the mid-90s. After one world championship competition in particular, one of the women I raced against and won silver to, she tested positive a matter of weeks after the competition. And it was so infuriating that the matter wasn't investigated at all. They didn't retest the sample. They didn't do anything. In the case of those athletes, it was a different kind of frustration too. I was also really concerned about those young women. Even at the time, I was frustrated that I was racing against doping athletes, but the women in China at the time were being systemically doped. They didn't know they were being doped. Some of the old women might have started to suspect, but these young girls were being doped without their knowledge. And I've met so many athletes since then, while I've been out of sport, that have told me their stories about being doped and not realizing they're being doped until they finally figure it out. And that's a whole different kind of tragedy. It happens all the time.
The fact that you're saying that happens all the time, just really, even Jarvis over here is shaking his head saying, like, that's painful. Crazy.
Yeah.
It's very, and okay, look, I understand the value of winning. Countries want to win. They invest a lot of money in their athletic programs, and the Olympics and other major global competitions are coveted by a lot. But I'm just blown away that any kind of organization is willing to put people at risk like that without them knowing.
Right.
Why aren't athletes suing? Like, why are they? Because they're in the same boat. They want to win. Is that bad? When they find out, that is.
I think it really depends on the laws governing those respectful countries. Excuse me. Whether an athlete can sue really depends on the laws they have to abide under. And I wish people would sue more often. I wish I sued the IOC and International Swimming Governing Body, because it was just a blatant disregard for fairness and adherence to the rules that were on paper that I agreed to follow, everybody agreed to follow. They didn't uphold their end. And again, this happens all the time. My main point is always that, yeah, people can dope if they want to, but they can't compete in the games if they're using drugs that are banned. And it's not that difficult to determine if a drug is banned, because you're given a list of categories of drugs that are banned and specific drugs that are banned. So even if your specific drug is not listed, if you're using a drug that's not being tested for yet and it's under that category of performance enhancing drug, you're not allowed to take it. Additionally, beyond that, the testing procedures need to be upheld. They're not. You mentioned Michelle Smith, the Irish woman I competed against in the Olympic Games. She eventually got caught because she tampered with her sample. So I'm sure you guys know this, but when somebody shows up at your house to perform an anti-doping test, that agent is supposed to follow you and keep you within their sight. So she should have never been able to get away from that agent enough to pour whiskey into that urine sample.
Right.
So that's a failure, number one. Number two, I've heard on multiple occasions that she evaded tests and wasn't punished for that. You're only allowed to miss so many tests. She's just one case. There are plenty of people like that. So my point is, there's these great rules in place, but there's not enforced.
Right. And I want to come back to that, but just to give people a context, and really, guys, there are many of you listening. I'd love to hear your questions and thoughts, because I find this to be shocking and painful. Right now, they're estimating of the elite athletes that they know of in the world that at least 3,000 of them are competing while using performance-enhancing drugs.
Right.
A full 1/3 at any given time across all sports worldwide, where there's regulation, they're estimating that 1/3 of the athletes at any given moment are competing while using these drugs. I find that completely abhorrent. I just cannot believe in this day and age that still is allowed to happen.
Allison, I think that your story highlights so beautifully one of the inherent fallacies, I think, in the position held by those who do believe that doping should be allowed. And from so many of the different people that I spoke to about why they support
somebody actually thinks doping should be allowed.
Yes,
are you kidding me?
For those who support doping, believe that doping is no different really than any other edge that people are looking for. So just like people look for an edge in training, in nutrition, in the use of equipment, in the use of facilities, whatever it is, they're looking to doping to give them an edge. And so for those who believe that the edge really is more about helping athletes recover faster, quicker, more effectively, more efficiently, than it is about helping boost their performance, they should be allowed to have that edge. And when you're talking about athletes who are facing millions of dollars on the line in sponsorships, why wouldn't they look for an edge?
Well, if I can say something to that,
yeah.
I've heard that point a lot. And, as an aside, it usually comes from certain sports, which I find interesting. Mm-hmm. But my response to that is always, yeah, everybody's looking for an edge, but you can't break the rules and expect to get away with it.
Right.
It should be treated the same as rules of play. So if I show up at the competition and I decide to break one of the technical rules in my event, I should fully expect to get disqualified. The same should be in place for doping. If you break the rule, you should fully expect to get disqualified.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's no different than equipment. Like, you can't have a corked bat in baseball. Like, that's not, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, there's an
absolutely.
edge, but then there's an illegal edge.
Right. So is this more about law and order and sticking to the rules of play, or is it really about what the initial argument was supposed to have been, which was we want to level the playing field? And if it's about leveling the playing field, then again, those who support doping point out that right now, for the most part, the field of play isn't level anyhow. Athletes around the world don't already have the same access to the same diet, to the same nutrition, to the same trainers, the same facilities, the same equipment, the same everything. So the field of play isn't level anyhow.
But that's life.
Right.
I mean, Allison, we always talk here about, sports being a metaphor for life. That's life.
Yeah.
None of it, we don't all come out of the womb with exactly the same assets, skills, edge that everybody else has.
Sure.
Exactly. I was born and grew to be 5'8", very much on the small ends for my sport and for most sports. I would have loved to have changed that. But, you have what you have, and you work within the rules and you do your best. That's kind of the point, really. Like, to pursue excellence within the framework of what's allowed to and established to achieve a fair playing field.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like if you're, you're a racehorse, you get to cut across the field because you can jump the fence.
Right.
I mean, that argument to me is such a slippery slope. I can't even fathom that that's
it exists.
The position that they're taking.
Right.
I mean, that anybody is taking.
Right.
It's cheating.
It is cheating.
Well, and not to mention that many performance doping methods are completely harmful to your health.
Yeah.
You may get lucky and not suffer many consequences, but it's very likely you'll suffer consequences later on down the line.
Right, and then where's the complaint? Do you see athletes, Allison, that have dope that when they're 50 years old, or where they can't have kids, or they have some kind of disease that's directly linked to it, going, "Oh, I'm so glad I did that. That was so worth it."
Right.
Some of them defend the actions of their country, but very few that I've seen. Many of them are upset, of course, and have learned to deal with those ramifications. But it wasn't like they, of course, had a choice, but it wasn't like they could, really look back on it and say, "Oh, that was great," as they are infertile and had hoped to have kids.
Well, I mean, for those who were doped unknowingly, I mean, my God, that to me sounds like a lawsuit that should happen, will happen. And if it isn't, I feel like I want to call these poor athletes up and say, some lawyer in the world will go after the organization, the government that allowed that to happen. That's like somebody, raping you.
Yeah.
Any male or female, they're doing something to your body that you're not giving them permission to do.
Sure.
How is that not?
Too,
Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead.
Sorry. You got to remember too that a lot of athletes live in very different environments than the U.S. and we have laws to protect, ourselves that many other countries don't. So, those girls I raced against in China, I mean, they can't just go hire a lawyer.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But somebody should be taking care of them.
Russia, I mean, many people's lives are still in danger that acted as whistleblowers. They actually risk their lives to not only compete for the country and then be doped and they risk their health, but to actually say something. I mean, that's a life risk in many cases.
Well, this is going to bring us to what I think is going to be the kind of the conversation for the rest of the show. But before we get there, and that's talking about the responsibility of governing bodies, of all sports bodies. I don't want to single out the IOC, but, across the board, whether it's professional sports or amateur sports. But, again, I feel like even those people who are in countries that don't have the same laws that we do, who are you? You're that person speaking out for them, right? Is it about awareness right now? Is it about telling people like me who, watch the Olympics and are excited about it, and I can't wait, and I know it's kind of in the background, but honestly, if I had been more aware about people being doped against their will,
right,
which didn't come out by, when we talked about state-sponsored doping with the whole Russia, explosion that happened in the last couple of Olympics, I don't recall hearing that specifically. So, how do we make that story known to the world so that there's enough outrage?
Yeah, I think keep talking about it. I would love to see more current athletes and current Olympians, especially with, a lot of awareness given to their name, speak out about this issue. I would love to see sponsors care more about upholding anti-doping standards at Olympic Games. Add a contingency to contract saying if 75% of the athletes are tested, then I'll pay you in full what I agreed to pay you. So for example, at the Rio Olympic Games, almost 50% of the athletes weren't even tested. And the official reason given was that the logistics were a problem and that the athletes couldn't be located.
Right.
How about say show up here at this time?
Well, you're showing
Well,
race day, game
even,
day.
Like, how about having doping agents at that race.
Exactly.
You know where to
Like,
find
they're
them on
gonna be
race
there.
day.
Yeah. And if they're not there, they don't get to compete in the Olympic Games, which, they all, of course, are there to compete in the Olympic Games.
Sure.
Okay, like, duh. Can I just say
Yeah.
duh? Is anybody out there watching? Please. Am I that dense that can't just be easily implemented?
Right. The infrastructure exists. Again, it goes back to where the desire is, and the desire doesn't clearly seem to have been in making sure that this is a problem that gets cleaned up.
Okay, so let's move to that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Allison.
No, I was just going to move to that.
Yeah.
So let's move to that. What the heck? Yeah. Or what? WTF? Let me say more strongly. I don't want to hurt anybody's gentle ears out there.
You're so polite even when you're cursing.
What's the incentive for? I mean, okay, it always comes down to money and big business, but honest to goodness,
right?
Well, the IOC should be concerned about money and big business right now.
Yeah, for many reasons.
The viewership is going down. And in my opinion, that's a large part because of how doping's been treated. Nobody wants to watch an Olympic Games, something that is so pure, being tainted by something so dirty. And the people that advocate for doping to be allowed, I find them mostly to be athletes, not necessarily Olympic athletes or elite level athletes, but I find those people generally tend to be athletes, not the bulk of the people that are watching the Olympic Games.
Right.
That is a big piece of bargaining power, I think. Not that the general public is bargaining, but they're showing their lack of interest. And I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think it's significantly or just partly due to the fact that doping is such an issue and it's tainted the Olympic Games in recent games? Or
well, and more than that, I mean, certainly when you think about some of those segments we were watching on the Olympics in China, the Olympics in Rio, when you just
Korea, not China.
I mean, no. But ages ago, when they're talking about how they would come in and remove people from their homes, destroy their homes, just destroy entire towns.
Oh yeah,
to build the stadiums. I mean, once I think we started to realize what it takes to put on the Olympic Games and the lives that are destroyed, and communities that are entirely wiped out. It goes beyond just the doping. It's everything that comes before the Olympic Games have actually arrived in the country.
Right. But do I think that's one of the reasons why people aren't watching as much? I do, but I also don't know how many people are as aware of those issues that what goes on.
All stuff is just coming to surface now.
Yeah.
It's very new.
I think the doping issue has been around longer, and I will say for me, because we had this conversation on one of our shows during the Winter Olympics.
Right.
How upset was I that any Russian athletes were there.
Yeah.
And again, I sympathize for the person, and I feel like the person should not have to pay if their country decides to, sponsor doping across the board.
Right.
But on the other hand, I feel like there's no other way that we are going to stop these things from happening if the athletes don't really feel the pain of getting caught.
Right.
And in my opinion, the fact that these athletes could show up and march and compete under the Olympic banner was outrageous.
Right.
To me.
Right.
And I know I might be harsh, but I agree with you. I think that's one of the reasons.
It's a huge reason. Look at the Tour de France. Who watches that?
Who watches it anymore?
Who watches that anymore? I mean, how can you? How can you watch and take any of it seriously? And I was you know me.
You're a cyclist,
I loved it. I watched it. I was obsessed. Lance Armstrong adored him and all the great things he was doing. And then, it's like, look, at the end of the day, what I think is so disheartening for so many people is that we've always looked to sports. We've looked to athletes. We've looked to these games, whatever they are, these events, as a way to sort of inspire us, to motivate us. Because you look at these people who have dedicated their lives to put in the effort, the training, the discipline. They eat, sleep, and breathe their sport. And yes, the assumption is there's a level playing field for the most part. The minute you throw in something like doping, what are you looking to inspire you? It's no longer just about the sheer satisfaction of having won. Whether you win a medal or not really is actually irrelevant. That you are able to participate, that you are performing at a particular level, that your work has paid off and gotten you to this point. That is what used to inspire people and motivate you.
Absolutely.
Now you look at these games, these events, and these athletes, and you question it all. You question all of it.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Before you speak, Allison, I just want to remind all of our listeners, thank you for joining us. We're here with Allison Wagner, former Olympian, silver medalist, world record holder, and we're talking about doping in sports. And it's obviously a very emotional conversation because we're upset. So we want to hear from you. If you have any comments, we'd love to hear from you. So go ahead. Sorry, Allison.
No, I was just going to tell a quick little funny story about Lance Armstrong. I've cared about doping obviously for a long time. And I had a swim lesson business in San Francisco for a number of years. And while Lance Armstrong was at his peak, everybody was wearing those Livestrong bracelets.
Yeah, right.
I mandated that anybody who wanted to take a lesson with me had to remove that bracelet before the lesson.
Wow.
Good for you.
Thought I was crazy.
Wow.
And, I'm like, no, he's doping.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and to be honest with you, when I found out the full extent of his doping, it hurt me in two ways because I was a big fan. I also, believe it or not, used to watch the Tour de France. I was there in France for the last stage and was there at the Arc de Triomphe. Yeah. So personally, I've experienced it. Yeah. I was invested and I was devastated and I spent probably the first 6 months standing up for him because I honestly could not believe it. I could not believe that even the athlete would feel good about themselves. One of the articles I read, Allison said that Michelle might have said something to you after your race that you had deserved it. Is that correct?
No, that was the woman who won the bronze medal.
Oh, okay.
And I won the silver. I barely touched her out for the silver.
Right, okay.
She was a reigning world champion, world record holder, had a bevy of gold medals, very accomplished athlete. I didn't know her personally, but yeah, it meant a lot to me that immediately after the race, she said to me, you're the real winner of this race.
Yeah, so it's, again, I'm not sure how athletes feel. Like, how do they stand up on the podium and go, hey, I won the gold or I won whatever, knowing what they did?
They can delude themselves. I've seen it, as I'm sure you guys have many times. People start telling themselves a story and then they believe it. Or somebody else tells them the story and then they believe it after, a number of years. And people start telling themselves that they're not cheating because, whatever reason they give themselves. And they eventually start to believe it. It's not true.
Or everyone's doing it, so why not me?
Yeah, why not?
Whatever story it is, yeah.
Right. I do have to point out, though, much to Wendy's earlier point about how we view sports as a metaphor for life, I think that one of the things that we can see about this entire story is that, talking about those athletes who are clean and competing fairly, to be able to stay in that mindset of putting in the work and being determined enough to continue on with your sport despite knowing what is going on.
Oh my gosh.
Despite knowing that you're competing against athletes who are doped up.
Yeah.
Just proves, again, that there's this beautiful mindset of an athlete that despite what is going on in life, despite the challenges that are coming up your way, if you're focused enough and you put in the work, you're determined enough, you can really achieve some amazing results. And despite what everyone else is doing, right or wrong, it's such a testament, I think, to the will of an athlete to be able to say, I'm jumping in that pool. And I know the person to my left and probably to the right is, doped up on something, but I'm doing what I came here to do. I think it's an amazing, amazing quality that has to be, if there's a silver lining to any of this, to acknowledge that. So, Allison, I think it's just a huge testament to the amazing things that you guys do and continue to do,
So, Allison, you have a couple of friends here, Dave Milligan, who's saying that, it was a tough aspect for a lot of people to give up the Livestrong bracelets.
Sure.
And that, and that he agrees with you that, athletes are lying to themselves.
Yeah.
And you got a nice note from BJ Miller, Bedford Miller.
Another Olympian,
Yeah, saying that he trained with you for years in Florida and that you're amazing and that you're still amazing and you're very loved. So thank you for your comments. We really appreciate it. Yeah, I want to applaud Allison and every athlete that still feels like it's worth getting in the pool, on the field, on the pitch, on the court. Yeah. It's if it weren't for you, I think everything would implode. And really, governing bodies and countries should be patting you all on the back and thanking you profusely for actually staying in the sport. Jarvis wanted to point out, if we continue on talking about what's in it for people, there's a ton of money in it for people. And a lot of these athletes are going on to make a lot of money in sponsorship and endorsements. And, for some, they're professional athletes that are getting paid for what they do.
Sure.
So there is a lot of money to be made and a lot of money to lose.
Right.
And I think that when it comes down to dollar and cents, I hate to always blame it, but I feel like that's what's driving this. It is a big business.
It is. Yeah.
And Allison, I read some stories about how certain athletes who were second or third to athletes that were doping and won gold medal lost a lot of their livelihood as a result.
Sure.
Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, that happens all the time. People remember gold medalists, not so much silver, bronze medalists. My personal story was that, I had a not so helpful and abusive coach. And around the Olympic Games, building into the games, he said, if you win the gold medal, you can have a break. And that's all I wanted. I just wanted a vacation. I wanted some time off. I had given my, age 10 to 19 at that point, every day, all day to the sport. And I just wanted to explore other things. So I was very motivated by that. Now, since I won the silver medal, no break. Additionally, my college scholarship was removed by my coach because I won the silver medal, not the gold.
Are you kidding me?
God.
No. And I turned down a lot of money over the years to maintain this eligibility and loyalty to this coach. So you don't really know people's stories, right? And there are so many ramifications. This is what I like to tell people who are doping out there. There are so many ramifications on your competitors, your families, your communities, and your country that you can't see now.
Yeah.
Or you may never see, but these things are actually happening.
Right.
You're damaging other people's lives by breaking the rules.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with
and
you more.
And then the flip side, to play devil's advocate, is that, again, someone in Allison's position, knowing that, could have said, I'm going to dope because I'm getting that gold medal. I have a lot on the line. I want a break. I want to get my scholarship. You can see why someone would make a decision like that in a situation like that. It's excruciating.
Look, again, I don't want to come at it from a too judgmental position. I view it as you're breaking the rules. So if I take it down to the simplest denominator, you're breaking the rules. The rules are clear.
Yeah.
It says, don't take this, you're doing it.
Right.
And so that, without judgment, right there, it's simple to me. We have a comment from Alex. Athletes that dope still work hard, if not harder than the ones that don't. So I don't really see how that's lying or cheating. Sure, they have an edge, but they still have to put their blood, sweat, and tears into it.
Another person telling themselves a story. It's lying and cheating because it's against the rules.
Right.
Look them up.
Right. And if it isn't,
writing.
Yeah.
Right. So if it isn't, then
then you're not
doping. Then you're not doping, and it's not an issue.
If you're taking a small dose B vitamin that's perfectly allowable by your governing body and the International Olympic Committee, then that's not doping.
Right. So
but doping is a term saved for banned performance-enhancing drugs in most people's lexicon.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's the kind of thing like the cryo baths where you jump into the freezing cold, below zero to recover.
Yeah.
That's okay. You can do that. No
Yeah.
problem. That helps your body recover quicker.
Right.
As far as I understand.
You haven't tried it?
Haven't tried that yet. I hear it's fun. I hear it
Maybe
makes you look younger.
Maybe after your next morning run.
Yeah, actually, I want to do it just to look younger. Forget the muscles. I hear it really works on your face.
Sounds good.
A lot of the articles that I read talked a lot about the inconsistencies, and I think it's worth having that conversation because there's two sides of it. There's the monitoring, and then there's the policing side, like what happens when you get caught, which now runs the gamut across different governing bodies, the sports organizations. And the fact is that if you get caught, it's not like it's across the board. You're caught with this substance, you're banned from the sport for X number of years or months or whatever. It's this person gets caught and they're out for 3 weeks. That person gets caught, they're out for 4 years. This person gets caught and they get a slap on the hand.
Sure.
What's up with that?
Well, that's my whole point. You know, I'm personally less interested in the argument about what is doping because the rules outlining what is doping, I think, are good. The problem is that the rules are broken and nothing happens.
Right.
And that's just extremely frustrating. Like I said earlier, when you show up at a competition, if you decide to take your horse across the field, I mean, that's not allowed.
Right.
And my opinion is that there needs to be an independently organized and run organization separate from the IOC. You know, perhaps they can set up a blind trust that's truly a blind trust. Perhaps national governing bodies can fund this organization. That's a little iffy. Ideally, unionization of athletes would fund that organization. So it could be completely separated from the IOC because, you know, in part, the IOC has interest to protect. They don't want the brand sullied by the number of positive tests that actually happen in Olympic Games. So those tests aren't always revealed, right?
Right.
So they don't want that, and it's totally understandable. But it doesn't change the fact that there's no way to expect people to follow rules if they're not enforced.
To me, it almost seems like it should be simpler than that. We shouldn't say, let's, in the example of the IOC, put out, here's what happens if you get caught doing this. All of the not local, but the individual sport governing bodies have to adhere to this.
That. Sure.
It is what it is.
To.
But they don't. So what's the reason that they don't? Or they don't have to. They don't get called on the mat for, you know, not going by the guidelines, do they?
Well, no. Usually corruption, national interests, like with Russia. I mean, what you saw happen with Russia. And that's why I think there needs to be a separate organization completely apart from the IOC and the ability for countries to tamper with these processes and standards and protocols so that they can be upheld uniformly.
I agree. And also, I want to say that Alex is coming back and saying, so what happens if tomorrow the governing bodies say it's now allowed? Will you still consider them cheating? And my answer to you, Alex, is absolutely not. If the drug is allowed, it's not cheating. It's not doping. If it isn't allowed, it is. Right. It's very. Thank you for. I'm not yelling at you, Alex, but thank you for your question. I love you, Alex. To me, it's very cut and dry.
Right. Follow the rules.
Follow the rules. Also, what is a little bit annoying to me on your behalf is that some governing bodies, when a gold medalist is stripped of their medal, or not stripped of the medal, found to have dope, that often the silver medalists, the bronze medalists all move up. That did not happen in your case. Why not? Mm-hmm.
Well, it was a different world back then. And she fought a good case in front of the Court of Arbitration of Sport. And they decided to only punish her for tampering with her sample, even though in the court documents, it was reported that there were traces of testosterone in her sample, a banned performance-enhancing drugs in her sample. And it wasn't pursued for reasons I probably don't know. I mean, this is the thing. It's completely frustrating for athletes like myself. I mean, why, after all these years, has Shirley Bischoff, a woman who competed against multiple East Germans who at this point, it's been well proven that those athletes doped. She should have those medals.
Yeah, there's no question.
I should have the gold medal.
Right.
I mean, I can't
The list goes on. The list is long.
So right now, the official policy by the United States Olympic Committee is that prior to the year 2000, no races will be reviewed or looked at in connection to doping. Personally, I find that frustrating. And my response to that is to talk about the importance of doping and to hopefully, in sharing my story and opinions and hopefully make some impact somewhere along the way that helps protect younger athletes from experiencing the same thing.
And the call to action here really is to be able to encourage other athletes to do exactly what Allison is doing, to follow suit and step up and speak out and share their stories.
I agree with that. I also want to ask Allison now, how do I talk? How do I create something in this conversation that's more than me sitting here saying I'm outraged? Like, are there petitions that can be signed? I mean, besides obviously not watching sports, which is unlikely, really, because I mean, if across the board, let's be honest, it's not just the Olympics; it's across the board. It's in professional sports as well. We know it is.
It's at the collegiate level. It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. It's very, like I said, a third of all athletes competing right now are doping. So where's my voice? What can I do? And for all the people watching, what can they do if this is something that outrages them? Except for Alex, who's okay with it.
I think for this day and age, a lot of us have access to some sort of platform that allows our voices to be heard, and we can use them. And like you said, more athletes need to use their voices to keep the media informed about this problem continuing and to keep the pressure on or try to apply more pressure. I really hope that sponsors of the Olympic Games will start to care more and more about a clean Olympic Games and pressure the Olympic Committee to find a way to make sure that the games are cleaner. Right now, the approach is to establish the independent testing authority, which is kind of a joke because it's not independent. It's funded and supported by the IOC.
Yeah.
So, what needs to happen is an actual solution that's followed up by actions.
Right.
So the WADA, World Anti-Doping Association code is great, but we need actions to make sure that code is in place and actually followed. In short, the answer to your question is, I think people can just keep talking about it. If they're connected to sponsors, use their voice and share their opinions about the Olympic Games and how great it is and how viewership is going down. And this is something that needs to be protected. The Olympic Games is a demonstration of the Olympic spirit, pursuing excellence, and I'll add the addendum, with integrity.
Yeah.
The Olympic Games was established to showcase the human potential. And it was not established to showcase the potential of drugs developed in a lab.
Right.
We want to see, and I think I speak for the majority of people around the world, we want to see human beings overcoming obstacles, demonstrating their excellence that they've dedicated their lives to.
Yep.
And people need to understand that this is a problem right now, and there can be something done about it if enough people keep applying pressure to the situation.
Well, listen, I hate to wrap this up. We have 1 minute to go because you've been amazing. I am very
There's a follow-up
honored.
show because we have so much more.
So much more to talk about, but I love the idea of going at it, talking to the sponsors, because that's where the money comes from. So I know I'm inspired. Thank you so much, Allison, for joining us today. You can find Allison on her website, which is now being posted. You can find us out on our website, thedistilleryinc.com. We are also on Facebook, on YouTube. We are on iTunes, Spotify, Castbox, Stitcher. I now understand that we are on iHeartRadio and Google Play. We really appreciate everybody who tuned in. Thanks for the great conversation, guys. Allison, you're going to have to go back and look at the comments. You have some friends that really love you, so it was great to see them on board. And we will be back in 2 weeks' time, May 22nd. We look forward to seeing all of you and hearing from you as well. Have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome to the new sound of online radio. Welcome to the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network. 'Cause you make me feel like I've been locked out of heaven. A mix of today's hits and hard-to-find favorites, combined with the most entertaining and intriguing talk anywhere. This is your sound. This is the sound of Universal Broadcasting Network at UBNradio.com.